Before we go any further, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. These stories travel farther than you'd ever believe, and every single location fills my heart. Now stay with me, because what this little girl signed in the middle of a crowded grocery store changed the life of a man who thought his story was already over, and what he did next left an entire community speechless. She was 9 years old, standing completely alone in the cereal aisle of a busy Riverside, California supermarket, and she was signing so fast her small hands were practically blurring. Her eyes were wide with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't quite calm either. And the man she was signing at, a tall, broad-shouldered stranger in a worn gray jacket, stood absolutely frozen, his shopping basket dangling forgotten from one hand, his face going pale as he read every single word her fingers were spelling out. A woman nearby noticed the exchange, pulled out her phone, and hit record. Nobody in that store could have predicted what happened next. But to understand why it mattered, you have to understand where this little girl came from. Her name was Iris. Iris Calloway. She had been born deaf, profoundly so, in both ears, the kind of silence that doctors described in clinical terms and parents received like a blow to the chest. Her mother, Dana, had spent the first 3 years of Iris's life learning American Sign Language alongside her daughter, building a private language between them, a world of flying fingers and expressive faces and secret jokes that only they understood completely. By the time Iris was 4, she could hold entire conversations with her hands. By the time she was 6, she was faster at signing than most adults who'd learned it in college. By the time she was 9, her mother was gone. Dana Calloway had died 14 months earlier from a sudden cardiac event. She was 34 years old. She was healthy. She had been laughing at a television show when her heart simply stopped, and Iris, who had been doing homework at the kitchen table 8 feet away, had watched her mother slump sideways on the couch with the confused, disbelieving eyes of a child who doesn't yet understand the permanence of what she's seeing. The trauma of it had shaped Iris in ways that were both visible and invisible. Visible because she flinched at sudden movements, because she startled easily, because she had learned to read rooms and people with an almost uncomfortable intensity, the kind that came from spending a lifetime watching faces and bodies instead of listening to words. Invisible because deep inside the small, careful architecture of herself, Iris Calloway had quietly decided that the world was not to be trusted. That people left. That staying close to someone was just a longer way of getting hurt. She had been placed with her maternal aunt, Carol, a decent woman with 3 children of her own and a house that was already too loud and too crowded. Carol loved Iris in the way that busy people love complicated situations, genuinely, but from a careful distance. She learned a few basic signs, bought a whiteboard for the kitchen, and told herself she was doing her best. Social services agreed. Iris went to school, came home, ate dinner, went to bed. She didn't complain. She didn't cause problems. She had learned to be very, very quiet about the things that hurt. But 14 months of that particular kind of invisible loneliness had carved something hollow into the center of her chest, and on a Thursday afternoon in late September, when Carol sent her to the grocery store with a handwritten list and a $20 bill, Iris had wandered into the cereal aisle and come face to face with a man who was reading the back of a granola box with the concentrated frown of someone who genuinely didn't understand the nutritional information but was determined to try. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 38 years old, a carpenter by trade, with calloused hands and tired eyes and a habit of talking too loudly in quiet spaces because, as he'd explained to anyone who asked, his own hearing loss in his right ear meant he'd lost track of volume years ago. He'd learned American Sign Language 8 years ago, back when his younger brother's son was born deaf, and though his nephew now lived in another state, Marcus had never stopped practicing. He signed to himself sometimes while working, narrating his own tasks like a habit he'd never bothered to break. He hadn't noticed Iris watching him from the end of the aisle. But Iris had noticed him. She'd seen his hands moving. Not dramatically, just the small habitual signing of a man thinking aloud in a language most people didn't know he spoke. And something in Iris, that careful, watchful, brilliantly perceptive something, had sparked. She walked directly up to him. She stood there for 3 full seconds, studying his face with the forensic attention she gave everything important. Then her hands moved. "You signed," she said. Not a question. Marcus looked down. Blinked. His face shifted through surprise, recognition, warmth. "A little," he signed back, smiling. "Not great." "You." And Iris Calloway, who had not truly spoken to another human being in 14 months, signed something that made the woman with the phone go completely still. "Everyone keeps leaving," she signed, her small hands precise and steady. "He won't stop following me." Marcus's face went pale. "Who?" He signed back immediately, his posture straightening, his carpenter's hands now very still and very serious. "Who is following you?" "Right now." And that was where the video cut out. That was the moment that got shared 40,000 times before midnight. But the real story, the one that mattered, was just beginning. Because the he Iris meant was not a person. And when Marcus finally understood what she was actually telling him, when the full weight of what this 9-year-old girl had been carrying landed in his chest like something physical, he did something that nobody in that grocery store expected. He sat down on the floor of the cereal aisle. Right there, between the Cheerios and the granola bars, this 6'2" carpenter with sawdust still on his jacket just sat down on the linoleum floor so that he was at her eye level, and he signed, slowly and clearly, "Tell me everything. I'm not going anywhere." Iris stared at him for a long moment. Her hands were trembling very slightly. This was the first time in 14 months that someone had sat down to be at her level. Her mother used to do that. Dana Calloway used to crouch or sit or kneel, always bringing herself to Iris's height, always saying with her body, "You are worth the effort of getting low." Something cracked open behind Iris's careful eyes. She sat down across from him on the cold grocery store floor, tucked her knees up to her chest, and began to sign. The grief, she explained, had been following her. Ever since her mother died, she kept seeing her mother's face, in mirrors, in windows, in the faces of women at school pickup who wore their hair the same way. She kept dreaming that her mother was trying to sign to her from somewhere Iris couldn't reach, and when she woke up, the silence of not being able to sign back felt like the worst kind of loss all over again. He was the grief. The grief wouldn't stop following her. And she hadn't been able to tell anyone because no one in her life right now could understand her fast enough to follow. Marcus read every single word of it. He didn't rush her. He didn't look uncomfortable, or check his phone or glance around to see if anyone was watching. He just watched her hands and read her pain, and when she finished, he signed back, "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard anyone say." Iris looked at him with eyes that were trying very hard not to cry. "I'm Marcus," he signed. "I'm very glad you talked to me today." She signed her name back carefully. "Iris. Like the flower." "I know that flower," he signed. "It's strong. Grows in all kinds of weather." She almost smiled. Not quite. But almost. And in the produce section, completely unaware of any of this, a grocery store manager named Teresa was watching the security feed with her hand over her mouth, already reaching for her phone, because something extraordinary was happening in aisle 7, and the world deserved to see it. Marcus Cole had not planned on changing anyone's life that Thursday afternoon. He had planned on buying granola, possibly some eggs, debating with himself for approximately 10 minutes about whether he actually needed the expensive olive oil or if the store brand was fine, and then going home to his small rented house on Birchwood Lane, eating leftover pasta, and watching 30 minutes of a nature documentary before falling asleep on the couch. This had been his routine for the better part of 2 years, ever since his divorce from Pamela had been finalized with the quiet devastation of two people who had loved each other deeply, and still somehow managed to fail each other completely. He was not depressed, exactly. He had done the therapy, put in the work, learned the difference between grief and self-pity. He went to work. He built beautiful things with his hands, cabinetry, bookshelves, the occasional deck or staircase that people photographed and posted online with captions about craftsmanship. He was good at his job. He called his mother on Sundays. He had friends, the kind that texted sporadically and met for beer twice a month, the kind of friendships that felt like furniture, comfortable and present, and not something you thought about until it wasn't there. But there was a particular kind of quiet in his house that had no good name. Not peaceful. Not restful. Just empty, in the specific way that spaces become empty when they've been built for more people than currently live in them. He and Pamela had talked about children, had tried for children, had lost 2 pregnancies in the cold clinical language of miscarriage statistics, and somewhere in the grief of that, they had lost each other too. The divorce had been her idea, and he had agreed to it with the hollow recognition of a man who understood that sometimes love was not enough to hold the structure together if the foundation had cracked. He had grieved. He had rebuilt, quietly, carefully, the way he built everything, with attention and patience and an awareness that good work took time. But he had not expected to feel anything like hope in the cereal aisle of a riverside supermarket on a Thursday in September. And yet, after Iris had signed her story and he had signed back, after the almost smile and the very careful eyes and the small miracle of connection that had happened on the linoleum floor, Marcus had stood up, dusted off his jacket, and done the completely reasonable thing. He helped her find the items on her grocery list. They moved through the store together in the particular silence of people who communicate differently from the world around them, and it was, Marcus would later say, one of the most peaceful 20 minutes of his recent life. Iris knew exactly where everything was. She pointed, he reached. He occasionally signed something observational. This orange looks suspicious. And she would sign back a correction. You want the ones with the smooth skin, not bumpy. And it felt like a conversation that had been happening for years rather than minutes. At the checkout line, she handed over her aunt's $20 bill with the careful precision of a child who had learned to be responsible with things that belonged to other people. The total came to $19.42. She pocketed the change with grave seriousness. Outside the automatic doors, in the warm California September air, she stopped and turned to face him. Thank you, she signed. Anytime, he signed back. Then, because something in him couldn't quite let the moment close, are you okay? Is there someone waiting for you? She looked at him for a long moment. That forensic look, the one that read everything. My aunt's car is there, she signed, pointing to a minivan across the parking lot where a woman was visible through the windshield, eyes on her phone. She's always on her phone. It wasn't a complaint, exactly. It was a fact delivered with the careful neutrality of a child who has learned that complaining changes nothing. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Do you have people to sign with? He asked. Friends, teachers. Iris considered this seriously. There's an interpreter at school. She's okay. She doesn't know the funny signs. The funny signs. Iris demonstrated a rapid, expressive sequence that was clearly some kind of inside joke, the kind of signing shorthand that develops between two people who talk in a private language. It was her mother's signing, he somehow understood. Private vocabulary that had no one to speak it to anymore. Marcus watched her hands and felt the grief of it like a physical weight. Those are good signs, he signed carefully. It would be a shame to forget them. Something flickered across her face. Not quite pain, not quite gratitude. Something between. I have to go, she signed. Okay, he signed. Then, making a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives, I come here most Thursdays. Same time. If you ever need someone to sign with. She looked at him with those careful eyes. That's a strange thing to say to a stranger. Probably, he agreed. But I meant it. She turned and walked toward the minivan without signing anything else. Marcus stood in the parking lot watching her go, feeling slightly ridiculous and also strangely certain that this was not the end of anything. More like an opening. He was right. The woman with the phone had uploaded her video that evening. By morning, it had 40,000 shares. By afternoon, the comments were a rolling cascade of people who had cried at their desks, who had called their parents, who had shared it with their deaf children, or their signing friends, or their grief support groups. The local news picked it up by evening. A reporter named Carla James tracked down the grocery store, tracked down the manager Teresa, tracked down the security footage timestamp, and began making calls. She found Marcus through his carpentry business, which was listed on a community board near the store. She found Iris through a source she would never publicly name, though anyone who watched carefully could see the aunt's minivan in the background of the phone video if they looked. Marcus agreed to speak to the reporter on one condition: that nothing about Iris be published without the family's consent. He said this quietly but absolutely, in the tone of a man who had decided something. Carla James, who was good at her job and better at recognizing a real story, agreed. What she found when she began reporting was not a simple viral moment. It was a 9-year-old girl who had been largely invisible for 14 months, passing through a system of adequate care and genuine but insufficient love, carrying a grief so specific and so lonely that she had almost entirely stopped trying to communicate it. And it was a man who had learned a language for love and had no one left to speak it to, who had sat down on a grocery store floor because something in him recognized the weight of being unheard. The question everyone was asking in the comments: did they meet again? What happened next? Was the question Carla was now chasing, driving across Riverside with her recorder and her notebook, trying to find the rest of a story that felt important in the particular way that true things feel important. She found Marcus at his workshop on a Friday morning, planing a length of oak with long, careful strokes. She asked him about the video. He set down the plane and was quiet for a moment. "I went back on Thursday," he finally said. "She was there." Carla leaned forward. "And?" Marcus looked at his hands, those large, calloused, eloquent hands. "And she brought her grocery list again," he said. "But this time she also brought a notebook. She'd written down all the funny signs. The ones her mother made up. She wanted me to learn them so they wouldn't disappear." Carla James, who had been a journalist for 11 years and thought she was past the point of crying at interviews, pressed her recorder to the table and took a breath. "What did you do?" she asked. Marcus picked up the plane again. Set it back down. "I learned every single one," he said. But here is where the story took a turn that nobody, not Carla, not the 40,000 people who shared the video, not even Marcus himself, could have predicted. Because the following Tuesday, Marcus received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. It was a social worker named Beverly Hammond. And what she said on that call would change everything. Beverly Hammond had been a family services social worker for 19 years. She had seen the full spectrum of what people were capable of, both the devastating failures and the quiet extraordinary acts of ordinary love that never made the news but held the world together. She was not easily moved. She had developed, by professional necessity, a layer of careful distance between her heart and her casework, the kind of emotional armor that allowed her to function in a job that would otherwise hollow a person out entirely. She had cried exactly 3 times in 19 years on the job. The Thursday grocery store video made it 4. Beverly had a specific reason for her call that Tuesday morning, one that went beyond the emotional resonance of the footage. She had Carol Maitland's case. Iris Calloway's case. She had been managing it with the careful, overworked attention of a professional carrying too many files, doing her best, knowing that best in a system this underfunded was sometimes not enough. Carol was not abusive. Carol was not neglectful in any legally actionable sense. But Beverly had sat across from Iris at their last home visit and watched the girl answer questions on a whiteboard with the careful economy of someone who had learned that full answers invited more questions, and she had felt the absence of true connection like a cold draft in a warm room. She had been watching. And now here was this video. This carpenter. This grocery store floor. "Mr. Cole," she said, when Marcus picked up. "My name is Beverly Hammond. I'm a family services social worker, and I believe you've recently met a child named Iris Calloway." Marcus said yes, carefully. "I need to ask you some questions," Beverly said. "And I need you to be very honest with me, because this matters." She asked about his background, his work history, his living situation. Whether he had any criminal record. He didn't. Whether he had completed any childcare certifications, he hadn't, but he was willing. Whether his divorce proceedings had involved any domestic concerns, they hadn't, and Pamela, to her genuine credit, confirmed this when Beverly called her. Beverly asked why he had learned sign language. He told her about his nephew. She asked why he had sat down on the grocery store floor. He was quiet for a long moment. Because my brother always said that if you want to really talk to someone, he said, you have to be willing to get to their level. And I didn't want her to feel like she had to look up at another adult who was about to walk away. Beverly wrote this down verbatim. She asked, finally, the question she had been building toward for the whole conversation. Mr. Cole, have you ever considered fostering? The silence on the other end of the line was long enough that she began to wonder if the call had dropped. Then Marcus said very quietly, I didn't think I could. Why not? I'm single. I live alone. I work with my hands, long hours sometimes. A pause. I thought that wasn't enough. Mr. Cole, Beverly said, with the directness of someone who had watched 19 years of good intentions stall out in the gap between wanting to help and believing you could, what Iris needs is not perfection. What she needs is someone who shows up and speaks her language. Do you understand what I'm saying? Another long silence. Yes, he said. I understand. The process is not quick, Beverly warned him. There are requirements, home studies, background checks, training hours. And Iris would have to choose this too. She gets a voice in her placement. That's non-negotiable. Good, Marcus said immediately. It should be her choice. Beverly Hammond wrote something else down. She didn't tell Marcus what she wrote. But what she wrote was, this one is real. The process that followed was neither fast nor simple. Marcus threw himself into the foster certification requirements with the same focused patience he brought to his carpentry, methodically, without complaint, learning what was needed and building it properly. He completed 40 hours of training. He attended every required class, asked questions that the instructors noted as unusually thoughtful, and on the drive home from the final session sat in his car for 10 minutes in the parking lot before allowing himself to feel the full weight of what he was attempting. He was trying to become a father. Not biologically. Not the way he had once imagined it, with Pamela, in the house they'd planned together. He was trying to become a father to a 9-year-old deaf girl who had already lost the most important person in her world, who had built walls with the careful engineering of someone who understood loss, who came to the grocery store every Thursday with a list and a notebook full of her dead mother's signs. He was terrified. He also could not imagine doing anything else. The Thursday meetings continued throughout the process, known to Beverly and properly documented, supervised initially by Carol, who sat in her car in the parking lot with her phone and her quiet relief that someone else was bearing some of this weight. Iris and Marcus developed what could only be described as a vocabulary, not just of signs, but of understanding. She taught him all of her mother's private signs. He learned them with the seriousness of a student who understood he was being entrusted with something sacred. She taught him the sign her mother had made up for that specific feeling when something is funny but also sad at the same time. There wasn't a real ASL sign for it. Dana Calloway had invented one, a twist of the wrist, a particular tilt of the head. Marcus practiced it until Iris said it was right. She taught him the sign her mother used for I love you but I'm also a little mad at you, a modification of the standard sign, with an added exasperated eyebrow raise that was entirely Dana's invention. Marcus burst out laughing when he first saw it, and Iris, for the first time in 14 months, laughed back. A real laugh, high and surprised, the laugh of a child who had forgotten she still had one. Teresa, the grocery store manager, began leaving them a small corner table near the deli. She never said anything about it. She just cleared it every Thursday at 4 p.m. and made sure no one else sat there. The home study visit happened on a gray November morning. A woman named Patricia came to Marcus's house on Birchwood Lane with a clipboard and careful eyes, and she walked through every room, asked every required question, noted the woodworking tools in the tidy kitchen and the bookshelf near the door that had, sometime in the past 2 months, acquired several books about deaf education and childhood grief and the neuroscience of trauma. She noticed the small whiteboard hung at child height beside the front door. She didn't comment on it, but she photographed it for the file. The hearing was scheduled for the week before Christmas. Beverly called Marcus the morning before to remind him of the timeline. Iris would be asked, in a separate session with a child advocate, whether she wished to be considered for this placement. What if she says no? Marcus asked. Then you respect that, Beverly said. And you keep showing up on Thursdays until she's 18 if you have to, because that's also a kind of family. But Marcus, Beverly paused, and in 19 years of professional distance she allowed herself this once to break form just slightly. I've done this a long time. I've seen a lot of matches. And I need you to know that when I walked into your house and saw that whiteboard at child height, I had to step outside for a minute. Marcus was quiet. Why? He finally asked. Because, Beverly said, you put it there before the decision was made. You built the space for her before you knew she was coming. That's not strategy, Mr. Cole. That's love. The cliffhanger came the evening before the hearing, when Marcus's phone rang at 9 p.m., and the number on the screen was one he didn't recognize. He picked up. There was silence on the other end for 3 seconds. Then a small voice said, haltingly, speaking aloud rather than signing, the voice of a child who had been practicing, I know you can't hear me with your bad ear. So I'm talking loud. I wanted to say I'll say yes tomorrow. I already decided. I just wanted you to know before. Marcus pressed the phone against his chest and closed his eyes. When he brought it back to his ear, his voice was not quite steady. I'll say yes too, he said. I already decided too. The morning of the hearing was cold in the specific way that California December mornings can be cold. Bright and crisp and sharp-edged, the kind of weather that made everything feel very clear and very real. Marcus arrived at the family court building 20 minutes early, wearing the nicest shirt he owned, a deep navy blue that Pamela had once said brought out the steadiness in his eyes. He had not told her about the hearing. They were not close in that way anymore. But he had thought about her that morning, not with sadness exactly, more with a kind of gratitude, because the years with her had taught him things about love and loss and the particular courage it took to stay open after grief had come close enough to leave marks. Beverly Hammond met him at the entrance. She was wearing a scarf in a bright, unexpected orange, which Marcus had never seen her wear before, and he wondered if it was intentional, a small private signal of hope carried into the gray institutional corridors of Family Court. She's already inside, Beverly said. She came with Carol. She was very calm. Carol said she barely slept, but she was calm. Me too, Marcus said. The not sleeping part. Beverly almost smiled. Almost. The child advocate's session with Iris lasted 35 minutes. Marcus sat in a waiting room with institutional chairs and a coffee machine that produced something that resembled coffee in color only, and he thought about carpentry. About how you measured twice and cut once. About how the difference between a beautiful joint and a broken one was often invisible from the outside until you applied pressure, and that the only way to know if something was built to last was to build it honestly, without shortcuts, and then trust the work. He had been building honestly. He could only trust the work now. When Iris came out of the session, she was with a woman in her 30s carrying a file folder, and her expression was carefully neutral in the way that Iris's expression was often carefully neutral, but her hands were moving. Small, private movements at her sides, almost imperceptible. Marcus, who had spent months learning to read her, recognized it immediately. She was signing to herself. Quietly, privately. The sign she used for "it's going to be okay." Her mother's sign. The one she taught him in the grocery store in October. The one Dana Calloway had used when things were hard and needed to be true. He caught her eye across the waiting room. She looked at him with those forensic, careful, completely extraordinary eyes. Then she signed, once small and deliberate, "Ready." He signed back, "Ready." The formalities of family court are, by design, thorough and not dramatic. There were documents and statements and the measured language of legal proceedings, and Beverly presented the case history, and the child advocate spoke about Iris's expressed wishes, and a judge named Honorable Diana Reyes asked Marcus a series of direct questions that he answered with the same quiet honesty he'd given Beverly on the phone in October. She asked why he wanted to pursue this placement. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Because she taught me her mother's signs so they wouldn't disappear. And I think she deserves someone who will keep learning them." There was a pause in the courtroom. Judge Reyes made a note. The provisional placement was approved. In the hallway outside, Carol hugged Iris with the genuine warmth of a woman who had tried her best and knew it wasn't quite enough, and there were tears on Carol's face that were partly loss and partly enormous relief, the complicated emotion of someone releasing a responsibility that had been too big and too small at the same time. She pressed a small envelope into Iris's hands. Inside, Marcus would later learn, was a photograph of Dana Calloway, laughing, hands mid-sign, the photo Carol had been keeping on her phone but hadn't known how to give. Iris held the envelope against her chest and looked at Marcus. She didn't sign anything. He didn't either. Some things don't need language. The first evening at Birchwood Lane, Iris stood in the doorway of the small bedroom Marcus had prepared and looked at it with the careful, measuring gaze she gave everything important. He had painted it a soft green, not a child's cartoonish green, but the color of real leaves, quiet and alive. The bookshelf held a mix of chapter books and science books and 3 ASL dictionaries, including one with a section on regional variations that he'd ordered specially. The whiteboard was there, on the wall beside the window, plus a second smaller one on the bedside table for nighttime thoughts. She walked in slowly, touched the spine of a book, looked at the window, which faced the backyard where 2 large oak trees stood in the gray December light. Then she turned and signed, "It smells like wood." "I'm a carpenter," he signed back. "Everything I own smells like wood." "I like it," she signed. "It smells like something being made." Marcus stood in the doorway of this small green room and felt something shift in his chest, the particular movement of a wall coming down that you hadn't fully realized you'd built. "Yeah," he signed. "That's a good way to put it." Dinner that first night was spaghetti, because it was what he knew how to make without nerves making it worse. She ate carefully, watching him in the kitchen with her sideways analytical attention, and at one point signed, "You're counting the pasta." "I always lose track of how much is enough for one person." She considered this. "Now there are 2 people." "Yes," he signed. "That helps." After dinner she showed him 3 new signs she'd made up herself, her own inventions, her own private vocabulary that had been building in silence for 14 months with nowhere to go. One was the sign for the exact feeling of waking up and forgetting for 1 second that the bad thing happened, and then remembering. It was a complex movement, both hands, expressive and precise and heartbreaking. He learned it properly. She watched him practice and corrected him twice until he had it exactly right. Then she signed, for the first time, something that was not a question or an observation or a piece of practical information. She signed it looking directly at him, hands steady, expression serious. "Thank you for learning them." Marcus set down his notepad. "Thank you for teaching me," he signed back. The news coverage, when Carla James's full story ran in January, was quiet and thorough and human in the way that real stories are human, not clean, not simple, but true. It covered the viral video, the grocery store meetings, the certification process, the hearing. It included a photograph of Marcus and Iris in the backyard at Birchwood Lane, standing under the oak trees, both of them signing something mid-conversation, their faces turned slightly toward each other. You could not read what they were saying, but you could see, clearly, that they were listening. The comments came in thousands. Parents of deaf children, grief counselors, foster families, single parents, adults who had aged out of the foster system without ever finding what Iris had found, teachers of ASL who assigned the article to their classes. A deaf woman in her 40s who commented that she had spent years hoping someone would care enough to learn her language, and to anyone who was thinking of fostering a deaf child, "Please just learn the signs. That's all it takes, just learn the signs." Beverly Hammond read the article at her desk on a Tuesday morning and allowed herself, unprofessionally, to cry for the 5th time in 19 years. She put the article in Iris's file. Then she closed the file. Not because the case was over. Because it was handled. Spring came to Riverside the way it always did, gradually, insistently, pushing color back into the gray edges of things. The oak trees in the backyard at Birchwood Lane grew new leaves, bright and almost aggressively green, and Iris watched them from her bedroom window every morning with the attention she gave to things she wanted to memorize. She had lived at Birchwood Lane for 4 months. She had stopped counting the days after the first 6 weeks, which was, Marcus would later say, the first real sign that something had shifted. Not because the counting was bad, it was how she managed, marking time, knowing where she was in the passage of days, but because at some point the counting had simply stopped feeling necessary. At some point, this place had begun to feel less like a temporary geography and more like something that might last. Marcus had noticed the change first in her hands. In the early weeks, her signing had been careful and a little formal even in casual conversation, the signing of someone who was aware they were being observed and evaluated, who had not yet fully trusted the space. By February it had loosened. By March, she was signing to herself again the way she had been when she first saw him in the cereal aisle, privately, habitually, thinking aloud in the language of her hands without performing it for anyone. It meant she felt unobserved. It meant she felt safe. He never mentioned noticing it. He just noted it in the quiet accounting he kept of her progress, and felt something that he had begun to recognize as the particular joy of watching a person come back to themselves. School had been its own challenge. Iris's previous school had one interpreter, decent but overworked. Marcus had spent January in a series of increasingly direct conversations with the new school's administration about the quality of Iris's access to education, conversations that drew on his very limited patience for institutional inadequacy and his very developed capacity for persistent, polite, immovable insistence. By February, the school had hired a second interpreter and connected Iris with a deaf peer mentor named Simone, a 12-year-old girl who signed at the speed of light and had very strong opinions about both astrophysics and competitive reality television. Iris and Simone became friends with the swift, total commitment of children who find their frequency match. They signed so fast that Marcus, watching them in the school pickup line, could only catch about 60% of it, which was fine, he decided. Some things were meant to be private. He was still learning. He would always be learning. On a Saturday in April, they went to the farmers' market downtown, Iris and Marcus and, by arrangement, Simone and her mother, a quiet woman named Diane who was also hearing and had also learned ASL for her daughter and who shook Marcus's hand in the parking lot with the firm recognition of a fellow traveler on a road most people didn't take. At the farmers' market, Iris moved through the stalls with the confident curiosity she brought to everything now, touching things, asking sellers questions through Marcus's interpreting, buying a small pot of rosemary because, she signed to him, it smells like something that knows what it is. He bought it for her without asking what she meant, because by now he had learned that Iris's observations generally made more sense the longer you sat with them. Walking home, the rosemary pot in Iris's arms, Simone and her mother a few steps ahead in their own conversation, Iris signed to Marcus with one hand, managing the pot with the other, "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he signed back. "When you first sat down on the floor in the store, did you know what would happen?" He thought about this honestly. "No," he signed. "I just knew I didn't want to be someone who walked away." She absorbed this. "My mom used to say that the bravest thing a person could do was stay," she signed. She said most people leave. Not because they're bad. Just because staying is hard. She was right, Marcus signed. She was right about most things. Iris paused. Her hands rested for a moment, holding the rosemary against her chest. "Then I think she would have liked you." Marcus felt his throat tighten in a way that would have required words he didn't have, so he signed instead, the private sign, the one Iris had taught him in October, the one Dana Calloway had invented for funny and sad at the same time. Iris looked at his hands and then looked at his face. She laughed. That high, surprised laugh, the one that came out when she'd forgotten she still had it. He laughed too. They walked the rest of the way home in the easy silence of people who have enough language between them that silence is no longer a problem. The anniversary came in September, 1 year from the Thursday in the cereal aisle. Marcus had not made a big plan for it, instinctively understanding that Iris was not a child who responded well to large gestures, preferring instead the quiet accumulation of consistent small ones. But he had gotten up early and made her mother's recipe for banana pancakes, which Carol had given him, handwritten on an index card, in a small envelope alongside the photograph. He had learned to make them exactly right over several failed attempts in November and December. Iris came downstairs in her oversized sleep shirt, looked at the pancakes, and stood very still for a moment. Then she signed, "How do you know this recipe?" "Carol gave it to me." She was quiet. Her hand stayed still for a long moment, which was Iris's version of taking a breath. Then she sat down and ate, and while she ate she told Marcus things about her mother she hadn't told him before. Small things, specific things, the way Dana used to sign with her left hand while stirring things with her right, the way she'd invented signs for concepts that didn't have them because she believed every feeling deserved a name. The way she'd sat on the floor, always, to be at Iris's level. "I look for her sometimes," Iris signed. "In people. I know she's not there. But sometimes I see something that's a little like her. And..." Marcus signed. She looked at him with those eyes that had been forensic once, and were something warmer now. "You're not like her," she signed. "You're different. But some of the important parts are the same." He didn't ask which parts. He understood. That evening, they video-called Beverly Hammond, because it was the kind of day that deserved to be shared with the people who had built it. Beverly answered from her car in a parking lot, looking tired and a little emotional, her orange scarf visible around her neck even in September, as if she'd decided it was a permanent feature now. 1 year, Beverly said to the screen. 1 year, Marcus confirmed. Iris signed into the camera, "Thank you for making the call." Beverly pressed her hand to her mouth. "Thank you for answering," she signed back. Imperfectly, rustily, the signing of someone who had taken a beginner's course the previous spring and was still working on it. But clearly, unmistakably, the sign was right. Iris beamed. The grocery store still had their table on Thursdays. They still went, most weeks, not because they needed to but because some rituals deserved to be honored. Teresa always cleared the corner by the deli. Sometimes Iris ordered hot chocolate from the cafe counter and Marcus got coffee and they sat and signed to each other about nothing important, school, carpentry, the complicated personality of a neighborhood squirrel who had developed a grudge against their bird feeder, and it looked, to anyone watching, like something completely ordinary. Which was, of course, exactly what it was. Ordinary in the way that belonging is ordinary when you finally found it. Ordinary in the way that home is ordinary when the word has stopped feeling like a question. In the backyard at Birchwood Lane, the rosemary plant Iris had bought at the farmer's market had grown tall and fragrant in its pot on the back step. Every morning she checked it on her way out to school, a quick touch of the leaves, a small private ritual. Marcus had asked her once what she was doing. "Making sure it's still here," she'd signed. "It's doing great," he signed back. She looked at the plant for a moment. Then looked at him. "I know," she signed. "I just like to check." He understood that. More than he could easily say. So every morning, while Iris checked the rosemary, Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her do it, and felt the weight of what had been built, not quickly, not easily, not without fear or doubt, or the particular terror of loving something you could lose. Built the way good things are built. Carefully, honestly, with attention to the joints, trusting the work. Built to last. If this story found you today, if you've ever been the person who stayed, or the child who needed someone to sit down on the floor and listen, or the quiet third person who made a phone call that changed everything, then this story is for you. Please give it a like if it moved you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the unexpected, imperfect, extraordinary ways that love finds us. Because it always does. Even in the cereal aisle. Even after the silence. Even then.